All right. Oh, wow, look at that. So I'm back up here in the 7th floor of the Glickman Library in Portland, Maine, and going for the silhouette recording, which I prefer, probably for reasons that have to do both philosophically, for this idea of this dwelling of the sage and occupying a space in between, the threshold scholar, all that, and also because I tend to be a little bit vain, which is to say I don't like how I look on video. So you would say, well, then why aren't you just doing audio recordings? Well, it's because of the other thing. This is a very easy way to commemorate this writing, and just do it that way. So I'm doing something a little bit different today, and which is to say that I've written out the commentary that I'm going to post on the blog before, because I was up here reading, and I read this, reading the introduction to a book edited by Walter Mignolo and Elizabeth Boone that's entitled Writing Without Words. And there was an interesting citation from Derrida that had to do with the limits of ordinary speech and language, and the way in which writing exceeds that. And I thought, as I was reading this, that I wanted to write something in response to that, because I think it's very true, and I think it very much captures this writing. Because first and foremost, this project is about the writing, right? And however, what's sort of paradoxical about it is that the writing is speaking to something or addressing something beyond the writing. So even though it's about the writing is addressing something, that is to say, it's really describing something, because it's phenomenological, that's beyond writing. And in fact, what it's describing is within a sort of imaginary philosophical landscape. And yes, I use that term. I did say imaginary philosophical, hence why these are poetic phenomenological meditations. But in that imaginary philosophical landscape, I am addressing or documenting, describing, not addressing, the figure of the sage as one who is speaking, and the learning community as a dialogic community. So there's this kind of a couple of levels of tension, one of them being that the project itself is an experiment in writing, but that what I am writing about is not writing, but rather I'm offering a description of something that is non-literate. That is to say, it's spoken word, right? And it's the relationship between the spoken word, between speaking and hearing. So there's this sort of odd, strange kind of tension going on. So, and anyway, I wrote prior to reading, and I don't know if that signals a shift in the method or a shift in the approach that I'm taking. But it could, I guess, make sense if, in order to kind of go back to, I mean, it raises the question now, and it looks like I'm going to end up making a short video with commentary and then reading. It does make sense in some ways, and raises the question, why commemorate a project of writing through of reading, through the oral form of reading aloud and recording that reading and making a commentary. And I think, in a way, it needs to be, both need to happen, right? So that you do have this written commentary that I make, but again, the phenomenological description is a description of something, it's of the spoken word, and so both need to happen. Now, how does that relate back to the need to write before? Well, I guess it just captures the original flow, or the original way that the experiment was conducted, which is to say that I would write, that I was writing. So it wasn't as if I was speaking or doing these things And I couldn't. See, that's the interesting point about I mean, that relates to what I wrote about in my blog post. And that is to say that I wrote about how only in writing could I capture free thinking. I couldn't speak what I've written in Being and Learning. Couldn't. It is it is something that could only be written because of the poetic and rhythmic play of the language. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say. So I'm going to leave that. I'm going to record some of the meditation and then probably finish it up in another video. The dwelling of the sage as conveyance follows from her steadfast openness to the gathering of logos. In bearing what she has received, the sage conveys the beckoning of language and directs listening of her apprentices towards this appeal. The saying of the sage as conveyance of a directive is heard when Heraclitus says, quote, "For wisdom listen not to me but to the word, and know that all is one." The important emphasis on hearing we encounter in Heraclitus recalls our point of departure, that is, the question concerning the awakening or turning on the desire to learn. We were put underway by the rethinking of Plato's comment, which appears in the pages leading up to the allegory of the cave, describing the philosopher as the real lover of learning. Here we begin to understand better why the lover of learning is the one who is directed by an intensely attentive listening, and in this attunement is released to the other. The hearing is a freedom attained in poetic dwelling, where one submits to an ever more painstaking listening. Painstaking listening echoes the depiction of Paideia as an arduous passage, a painful and perplexing ordeal. We saw in the allegory how releasement is painful and the process of liberation that gets learning underway is described throughout as an arduous process. What is painstaking in this listening is the arduous labor involved in the poetic dwelling, in the making, the building, and the comportment of hearing and responding to the directive, and the endurance required for maintaining steadfast openness. We recall what was said earlier about the first moments of releasement, the moment of setting free and suddenly standing up. Hearing is thus always a response to a creative initiative, a making, a bringing forth, and allowing to appear. It is the creative response to wisdom that enjoins one in the beckoning of language and the directedness of wisdom. The submission is both an offering and a reception, a speaking and a listening. The one who dwells poetically submits to the appeal of language. In receiving this appeal, the learner listens to the evocative saying, but also responds by submitting questions and making meaning of what is received. Thus, hearing is not simply the passive long silence, but the twofold play of repose. The twofold play emerges in poetic dwelling as the two-sided character of responsive listening and speaking. We have said much of the evocative speaking, but up to this point little on poetic listening. But as we unpack the poetic dwelling of the sage, it becomes more evident that this evocative saying of the teacher is a response to a directive, and thus the poetic dwelling of the sage unfolds from an originary listening. We say hearing is the essence of learning because it points us to the originary response, to the initial directive. The sage is enjoined by the appeal of logos and transmits this to the apprentice. What is offered is precisely the listening that emerges from steadfast openness. The offering is conveyed in the evocative saying that evokes poetic listening. The appeal offered in the invocation is thus an invitation, first and foremost, to take up listening. The essence of attunement is this poetic listening. The originary moment of learning is identified with hearing, a hearing that unfolds in the enjoyment of dialogic community, a hearing that identifies the appearance of mindfulness, the creative vitality of the unified plurality. To dwell poetically is to be mindful. I'm going to leave it at that because I pretty much read the whole thing and I want to get this video down to one video, or have only one video for this day commemorating.